Good evening, I'm Dennis Ward, and this is Face to Face. Our guest this week is Bruce Spence. Some may know Bruce as Indian Car Guy, but Bruce is also a senior producer and lineup editor at APTN National News. Bruce has been with APTN News since the very beginning, April 16th, 2000 to be exact. The news, the network, and Bruce are all celebrating 20 years on the air. Bruce, a real pleasure to have you here on the show. This week will mark 20 years of APTN National News in its various iterations, names that it had. How do you reflect back on that time?
Well, that's a tough question. I guess they're all going to be tough questions coming from you, Dennis. But, it doesn't seem that long ago sometimes when I look back at some of the stories that we've done, some of the technological leaps ahead that have happened since then. It kind of puts it into a context, but it was a great moment for me personally, and I think it was probably a great moment for Indigenous peoples in Canada as a whole. Never before had we had our own network, television network, and never before had we had a national newscast that was for us, by us. So yeah, it's a moment to reflect on for sure.
Is it something? Is that newscast something that you remember even?
I remember the newscast quite well. We had assembled a team. Dan David, our first director, had assembled quite a team, and there was about 15 of us, I believe. And we were led by an Englishman by the name of Tim Knight, who had a lot of experience in setting up similar programs in third world countries, specifically Africa. So he brought us all together under the auspices of the network and of Dan David, and started us off. Most of us had print backgrounds, some radio, a little bit of TV, and he just basically started working on our writing. And then once our writing got together, how to put a story together, and then how to put an entire newscast together. And for some strange reason beyond me, I was one of the top people on the program. I was the senior producer, so it fell upon me to learn from Knight how to produce a TV show, a news show. So that was fun, and we finally had the big day arrived, and our stories were all ready. We were in those days sending our paper by fax and by email to translate into scripts for the cameras and for the on-air people to read. So that was quite fun. But we got it all together. We were all in the old studio in the other office, and we ran a newscast. We ran it. All the artwork was there. Carol was ready. Hello. Our first anchor, and away we went. And it wasn't quite perfect, so we weren't quite live at that point. We taped it again, and it was a better cast, and then we aired it. So it was a monumental moment for everybody on the team, studio crew, the brass upstairs, and I think our public.
We just recently celebrated yours and a couple of other people's 20th year here with the company. Was that a moment of reflection for you? 20 years with one organization, especially in news, is quite an achievement.
Well, I don't know what I'm doing right, keeping a low profile maybe. Ken was one of the original gangsters. He was one of the original team members that was in the process with Mr. Knight. And he's been there, like myself, since day one. And yeah, it was a moment to reflect. but it was right in the middle of a working day. So
Yeah.
no, Ken has been one of the backbones of the whole show, right from the start as well. You know, so he represents the studio crew to me, and I think without the expertise that you know, our studio crew has been able to bring forward day after day. I mean, and with the journalists doing the same thing, we've managed to put a good product out.
I imagine there must have been some hiccups back in the year 2000 of trying to assemble a national newscast, bringing in from bureaus all around the country. Do you remember much of that?
Well, it's a lot easier to do it if you're 1 day a week, and a little bit tougher to do 2 days a week. And then the decision was made to go 5 days a week. And, you know, we were sending paper back and forth through emails and stuff, and cutting and pasting scripts into the iNews program. And there was actually a point where our tapes were being mailed to here and assembled here. So we've done it every which way you can possibly think of doing it. And, you know, we got better at it. And I think the gradual move from 1 day to 2 days to 5 days a week and then to the sixth day was a learning curve. And probably to our advantage. We didn't have to do it all at once. But, you know, the way things go, I think we probably could have pulled that off as well.
The network itself, APTN, also celebrating its 20th year, obviously, this year. How important do you feel it was to for APTN to include a national newscast in its programming?
Well, I think it's vital. I mean, I've been watching news since I was, you know, in grade school. And I think there is a need in society to get some kind of authoritative voice that collects all the information and puts it out as accurately as humanly possible. So we've started doing that ourselves. We're not relying on the George Finstads and the Elwee Yosts of the world to do that for us. We're doing it ourselves, and not just with news, but with all the other programming that you see. But I think news is a serious business. There's things that are going on that affect a lot of people. And this is where it is from our perspective. So I think it's vital. I think any news programming is vital to any network, and APTN is no different.
Much more, Bruce, to speak about here on APTN News' 20th birthday. We're just going to step aside for a quick break, and then we'll continue the conversation here on Face to Face.
Hello, Kichimigwich Kapisiang. Thanks for joining us on InVision, our first news program here on APTN. Before we take a look at this week's stories, we want to introduce ourselves. Behind me in our newsroom from Winnipeg, some of our InVision staff. I'm Carol Adams. My background is Cree and Dene, originally from northern Saskatchewan. I'm your host for InVision News. In fact, the majority of our news, programming, and technical staff is of First Nations, Métis, or Inuit ancestry. They are the people in our newsroom behind the cameras.
Welcome back to Face to Face. Our guest this week is Bruce Spence, a senior producer and lineup editor at APTN News as we celebrate the 20th anniversary of APTN News here. Bruce, as some of our viewers will know from earlier episodes this season of Face to Face with then CEO Jean LaRose, the whole network almost didn't make it, and that includes news. There was some troubling times financially. Just 2 years after launching. What did you know in the newsroom about how dire the situation was?
What did I know? I knew absolutely nothing about that. I'm sure there's people that did, but if they did, they never said anything. I think we didn't find out about that until after Jean LaRose came on board. We were just going steady as she goes, damn the torpedoes, we've got a job to do, so we're doing it. So we just kept doing our best to get our show out every day. And yeah, when I found out about it, it was very surprising. We came, according to the information that I had, we came within a few days of CanCom pulling the plug on the entire network because they hadn't been compensated.
Mm-hmm. I guess, would you describe that, although you didn't know about it, it was business as usual, as one of the more difficult times for news?
Well, you know, there was a whole political scenario back in the early days. There was not exactly fear and loathing, but there were circumstances. There was, you know, there was heavy words coming from upstairs. We felt the need to organize with a union, and we did that. You know, getting our first contract was an important step. But you know, it was almost like a miniature band office. I hate to say it, but the intrigue and the backdoor stuff that was going on, it led for some tumultuous times for sure. But I think the finding out that we were within a few days of losing our ability to broadcast was a real eye-opener.
What do you feel are some of the greatest leaps forward for APTN News editorially, technologically?
I think there's probably too many to list. Just getting that first show to air was the accomplishment. Our top story was about a Mi'kmaq guy who was charged with illegally felling timber in their traditional territory. Maureen Gugu did that story, and things haven't changed much. You know, there are still rights that are being trampled on, and our people are still fighting for them. So. What more?
Yeah. Is it difficult to see, you know, some of the same issues continuing on with little advancement 20 years later?
You know, it can be, especially when you see the effect of on the younger generation. You know, when I see my grandkids, my great-grandkids, you know, struggling day to day just to make ends meet, and there's the same problems that were there 20, 25 years ago are still here. The socioeconomic problems, you know, addiction. Now they got meth, which is, you know, another thing that we have to deal with. The COVID-19 issue and the rights. You know, before COVID broke, we were dealing with a rights story out of British Columbia involving the Wet'suwet'en. Mm-hmm. You know, that was the big thing. There was blockades, there was rail blockades, there was a lot of hype about shutting down the entire country, which I don't think was entirely true on the part of the rail line companies, for instance. Mm-hmm. You know, but there was a lot of propaganda. There was a lot of action, and it was for us to try and sort it out.
In many ways, now the country is completely shut down. How has COVID-19 and this pandemic affected the way APTN News operates?
Well, you know, it's interesting. One of our more executive producers was commenting that we seem to be having a lot more stories left over at the end of the day, and that's been true for the last couple of weeks. We have reporters who are reporting from home. We have researchers and producers who are doing that job from home. We've got a few people that have to come in because, you know, you need the camera operators to put the show together. Mm-hmm. So it's had an impact. But I think just being able to work around it, you know, with different interviewing technology, we can do it, and we are doing it. And I think it's had a good impact on us, because I think we're more confident in what we can do.
We're going to talk a bit more about the pandemic and the importance of us broadcasting right now. But first, we're going to take another quick break, and then we'll continue the conversation here on Face to Face with APTN News producer Bruce Spence. Welcome back to Face to Face. Our guest this week is Bruce Spence, a senior producer at APTN National News, who is celebrating, along with the news and the network, their 20th anniversary here. And Bruce, we were talking about the COVID-19 pandemic before the break. Viewers of the show will know it's looking a little different. There's a little more spacing between us here right now. How critical do you think APTN News is in this time of a pandemic?
You know what? We're the original people of this continent, and we've had a very strange relationship with the newcomers, and the history has not been pleasant. This is not our first go around with a pandemic. Mm-hmm. There was smallpox 2 or 3 times over the course of history. By some accounts, some of that smallpox was deliberately put into our communities. There was a flu of 1919. My great-grandparents, both on my mother's side, were lost in that pandemic. And it's not our first rodeo, but I think it's vital. Again, there's that word, vital, that we have our own network, and we have our own people telling our own stories. And this is one story we're coming from a different angle, but we're coming at it.
When you were talking about, the actions that were going on across the country and the so-called shutting down of the country at that time, the news seemed to be focused on issues that were important to our viewers and us as well. But that's not exactly the case anymore as this pandemic's going on. And do you think if it weren't for APTN News, we wouldn't be hearing what's happening in some of these communities?
That could be. Yeah, that could be. I mean, there is other news happening, but if you look at all the major networks, even the U.S. networks now, understandably, it's all COVID. It's like there's nothing else. We're still trying to do the other stories that matter to our people, but we also have to start giving out some accurate information on how to handle this thing. We've got to get our medical doctors involved. We had that in the beginning, and I think we have to hear more about what we should be doing as individuals, or as families, or as communities to fight this thing. Borders are closing up north. Mm-hmm. People are going into quarantine. At this stage of the game, there's no COVID in Nunavut, but it's coming. It's coming, and we have to be ready for it. So yes, it's important, and I think we're the ones to do it here.
To step back to the achievements of the network over 20 years of the news, and in more recent years, APTN News is consistently up for national awards. What does that say to you now that we're seeing that?
I think we probably could have been up for a lot of those awards right from day one. Our coverage of the Burnt Church lobster wars was pretty good. Whoever heard of Barrier Lake before APTN National News came on the air? There's lots of natural resource and self-determination issues coming out of there. Even up to the Wet'suwet'en, those rights stories are very important. Winning those awards was an accomplishment. We've got such a diversity of views here. We've got environmentalists. We've got pro-pipeline. And we try to keep that out of the way we do our stories, but it reflects our communities as well, because we're all involved. So yeah, it's still an important thing.
Have you seen a change in the landscape of the way the mainstream media covers Indigenous issues since the start of APTN News?
Well, you know, one of the highest forms of flattery is imitation. I think we've set a standard, and I think other people are noticing that standard. Our journalists are being more sought after to come onto the other networks as experts or pundits. You know, so our viewpoints are getting out more and more that way. We've got other networks devoting entire segments of their workforce to Aboriginal people and Aboriginal issues. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I think we've had an influence there. You know, we go live on federal elections. You know, we go live on AFN elections. Mm-hmm. You know, we can jump in like that. We can preempt regular programming and go in on a story. You know, and we're totally capable of doing that. So there's been a lot of progress, and we are still needed.
20 years of the news here, and just wondering if you can crystal ball what the next 20 years might mean for APTN News, who really is still just a baby here.
Well, I can tell you what I would like to see. What will actually happen, though, is another thing I leave to other people with more connections to the spiritual aspect of things. I have some faith in our younger generation. Obviously, things have to change. If our younger people are going to exist and have happier lives, things are going to have to change. This whole business of the current styles of leadership has gotten us nowhere. As I said, we're covering the same stories that we covered 20 years ago. We're still covering them today. And it's very much the same system. That system has to change. So I hear younger people saying, you know, things like fight the patriarchy. You know, we have to do our own thing, our own way. You know, we have to go back to our own culture and start doing things the way things used to be done as much as humanly possible. So I'm encouraged by that. And I think if that keeps up, there will be a revolution in the way our status quo is in this country. And I think it's for the better.
Bruce, we're short on time here, but I do want to congratulate you on your 20 years and thank you for coming on the show as you move into elder status here at the network, but in your life as well. Real pleasure to have you join us on the show.
Well, thanks, Dennis. Thanks.
That is all the time we do have for today. We're always looking for new guests, so if you have any suggestions, please email us at news@aptn.ca. This show and past episodes are all available as podcasts. You can find those at aptnnews.ca/face-to-face podcast. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Dennis Ward. We'll see you next week.